Little old Ford, it rambled right along. The little old Ford, it rambled right along. The gas burned out.
Oh, hey, Beth!
Hi,
Beth,
Marty.
Hey!
Little Ford don't need gasoline.
Are you lost again?
I'm completely lost. I'm looking for the Wright Brothers cycle shop.
Well, you're in luck. We are at the Greenfield Village at the Henry Ford. Now, there are other things to see other than the cycle shop. Do you want to hop in the Model T and take a look?
Absolutely, let's go.
There are so many things, you're going to love it here. And we get to ride in the Model T.
Woohoo!
Woo!
Here we go. This is awesome.
So, here in Greenfield Village, Henry Ford brought all these historic homes in because they were going to be lost. So he brought them here to preserve them. And here you can see the law office where Lincoln practiced law. Next to it is George Washington Carver's cabin. They couldn't find his cabin, so Henry Ford had one built here, but George Washington Carver came and stayed in it, so technically it's his cabin.
I wonder if he had any peanut butter sandwiches while he was there.
I'm sure he did. Also here you can see the first house that had electric lights built by Thomas Edison.
What a bright idea.
There's a lot more that we can see at the Henry Ford, including the Wright Cycle Shop.
Oh, I can't wait.
Oh, okay. Here's the Wright Cycle Shop. Oh, and there's the curator, Matt Anderson. Hey, Matt, how you doing?
Hey, good. How are you?
Could you take us into the Wright Cycle Shop?
I'll be glad to. Do you have some time?
I've got about 30 minutes.
Well, why 30 minutes?
Well, because this is STEM in 30.
This is 7:30.
Hi, I'm Beth.
And I'm Marty. Now, normally we come to you live from the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C.
But today we are coming to you live from the Wright Brothers Cycle Shop in Greenfield Village in Dearborn, Michigan. We're at the Henry Ford, and today we are joined by curator Matt Anderson. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. Now, I know that the Wright Brothers Cycle Shop was actually in Dayton, Ohio. So how did it end up here right outside of Detroit?
Yes, so in the late 20s, early 30s, Henry Ford begins assembling Greenfield Village. It's kind of a museum of the United States in which he grew up. So he has buildings associated with a small town at that time, but also buildings associated with prominent Americans. At the same time, Orville Wright is starting to get a little worried about the cycle shop and the old Wright home in Dayton, worried that they're deteriorating, and he thinks, Ford's got this museum up in Dearborn, maybe that's the place for the buildings. They work out a deal, and Ford brings the buildings up here, brick by brick.
So they just packed them up and moved them.
One piece at a time.
Now, Matt, why bicycles? Why did the Wright brothers build bikes?
Yeah, the Wrights were really cashing in, literally, on a big fad of the 1890s. The bicycle, we kind of take it for granted today. Everybody has a bike, but back then it was a new cutting-edge thing. There were bikes before that, but they were the old penny farthing or high wheelers with the big wheel up front, the small wheel in back, kind of tough to ride. The safety bike had two wheels of the same size, much easier to ride, and everybody got in on it, and the Wrights went right ahead with it.
And we actually have in this room a bike that the Wright brothers built.
Yes, that's a Van Cleve bicycle, built by the Wrights themselves. It's their top-of-the-line model. Would have been about $60 in the 1890s.
Big money.
Okay, and we're going to take a look at some of the other buildings here in Greenfield Village. But we're going to get started now. To get started, we're going to welcome first the Henry Ford Academy. They're joining us live at Miller's School, and we'll be talking to them a little bit later. We also want to welcome our online audience and remind you that if you submit questions, maybe we'll use some on the show. If not, we do have some experts standing by to answer them.
We'd also like to welcome Elliott Hines Middle School. They're watching the show today live at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. They'll be submitting some questions which we'll have answered later on the show. Now, you saw earlier in the show part of Greenfield Village, but the Henry Ford is so much more. Check this out.
The Henry Ford, located in Dearborn, Michigan, is 200 acres of invention, inspiration, and innovation. It is named for its founder, the automobile industrialist Henry Ford, and the collection highlights his efforts to preserve items of historical interest.
It began as a simple yet bold idea to document the genius of ordinary people by recognizing and preserving the objects they used in the course of their everyday lives. In this museum, you can see Rosa Parks' bus, a series of presidential limousines, as well as the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile.
Okay, Matt, you've said that we are in the bike shop. However, this does not look at all like a bike shop.
Yeah, we're in the very back of the building here, and this is a room that the brothers set up as sort of their in-house machine shop so they could do repairs on the bikes, but then later do work on their gliders and airplanes.
Now, did the bike shop help fund this research that they were doing back here?
Absolutely. The Wright brothers did not have any outside financial support for their airplanes. They weren't getting money from a university or from the Army. Everything they did had to be funded out of their own pockets, so the bike shop profits were vital.
Now, the bike shop, they built bikes, but they also repaired and built their own bicycles. Is that correct? Would they build bikes back in this area as well?
They would. They would use some of this equipment to do that. And yeah, they had their own brand of bikes that they sold in addition to other company bikes.
Now, how did they go about conducting their research? I mean, this was a whole new idea. So where did they start?
Yeah, the Wrights were extremely methodical, and they started by reading. They wrote a letter to the Smithsonian asking for any information they had about aviation or aeronautics at that time. And they also made a lot of use of their father's library. Milton Wright was a great collector of books. He had not only scientific tomes, but also novels, books of poetry, things like that. So they had a great start right in the home.
Why were they able to succeed when so many others had failed at making an airplane?
Yeah, the Wrights had a lot of stick-to-itiveness. They didn't give up, and they had some difficult setbacks, particularly after the 1901 glider didn't perform as well as they thought it should. A lot of folks might have just walked away at that point, but not the Wrights. They went back, they analyzed the problem, figured out that the calculations they were using to determine their wing shape were incorrect. So rather than giving up, they went back and recalculated all those numbers themselves personally, and obviously it worked out.
Now, how did they recalculate those numbers? I understand there was a wind tunnel involved somehow.
They built their own wind tunnel, and they actually, appropriately enough, rigged up a bicycle too, so they could test different wing shapes on the bike and in the wind tunnel to determine how well they worked.
So they knew that failure was okay, so long as they fixed the problem in the long run.
Exactly. Failure wasn't a problem for them. It was a learning experience, and they could apply that lesson to the next step.
All right, well, would you like to take some questions from our audience?
I'd love to.
All right, we have a video question.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Wilson, and my question is, did they build the entire plane by themselves?
Elizabeth, that's a great question, and for the most part, they did, though they did have some outside help with a very vital part. They hired a fellow named Charlie Taylor to operate the cycle shop while they were at Kitty Hawk and getting more busy with their airplane. But Charlie also had a lot of skill with mechanical work, and he was able to build the engine for the Wright brothers, and that's the one that powered the 1903 Flyer.
They couldn't just buy an engine?
They thought that they could initially. The automobile was really becoming popular at the same time they were doing these experiments, and they kind of looked around but couldn't find anything that met their needs. They actually had an engine made out of aluminum, which was kind of cutting edge at that point, and much lighter, which was great for their plane.
Okay, so they needed a light engine to get off the ground.
Absolutely.
And Charlie was able to help them with
He was
that.
able to do it.
All right, let's take an online question. Does the Wright brothers plane have any gears?
That's a great question. And yes, if you take a look at it and you see it, there's a lot of bicycle technology that went into that airplane. You'll see the engine, but it's connected by a couple of gears and then chains and sprockets, just like the chain that connects your pedals to the rear tire of your bike. So yes.
So they took the knowledge of just bike parts and transferred that to the airplane as well.
Exactly right. Yep.
Okay, and we have a question from Miller School, where our Henry Ford Academy students are.
Hi there, my name's Omar Alami. How many different planes did the Wright brothers make?
The Wright brothers had a number of aircraft leading up to the successful 1903 Flyer. They had built a couple of gliders. Say in 1901 they had problems with their glider. In 1902 they went back with these new calculations. That one worked beautifully. And then 1903 is the Wright Flyer that sets that first flight that changes the world.
Now, they built the Wright Flyer. Did they build planes after the Flyer, or did they just build the airplane? It's like, okay, that's just pack it up and let's go home and build bikes.
You know, we think about the Flyer, that moment in December 17, 1903, as being it. The airplanes invented were done, but wasn't the case at all. No, they came back to Dayton and they built a series of additional planes, sort of refining and learning to master how to fly the aircraft and how to perfect it.
All right, let's take an online question. Did the Wright brothers ever get hurt flying their airplanes?
That's a great question. And initially, they didn't have much more than simple bumps and bruises. It's part of the reason they chose Kitty Hawk, because if they crashed there was a lot of soft sand, they wouldn't get too hurt. And they weren't flying too far off the ground. Later on, though, in 1908, Orville Wright has a pretty serious accident out in Virginia, and he's actually confined to bed for a while and walks with a cane and was troubled a bit by that injury for the rest of his life, really.
Did they ever fly together?
They really didn't. There was one time the two of them flew together, but as a rule, they decided not to, being kind of practical, thinking, if something happens and we're both killed in an accident, then everything's set back. So to be safe, they would only fly one at a time.
Okay, let's take a question from our Henry Ford Academy audience.
Hello, my name is Russell. My question is, how long did it take for the Wright brothers to actually build the plane?
How long did it take for them to actually build the airplane?
That's a great question. Typically, they would build over the course of one season. So their season in Kitty Hawk would be in the fall. They'd go out there in October, November. Of course, the first flight was December 17th. So once they came back home, then they would start rethinking their method. And they'd do as much as they could in the spring and the fall, because, of course, they'd be busy with cycles in the summertime. But typically, every year, they'd have a new model.
Now, how long do you think from start to finish? Because they started experimenting with kites, correct, before they actually built an airplane.
Right. They get serious in studying aviation in 1899. They make their first flight in 1903. So you're looking at about 4 years there from start to finish.
That's a lot of endurance.
It is.
To keep up with all that for over 4 years.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, the Wright brothers are not the only inventors here. And we are going to go to actually Henry Ford's school, which is the Miller School, which is located here in Greenfield Village. And Marty has a class over there, and they're working on a project. Let's see what Marty's doing.
Thanks, Beth. I'm here in Miller School, and this is an exact replica of a one-room schoolhouse that Henry Ford actually attended. Now, I've got my friends here from the Henry Ford Academy, and I've given them a job. Their job today is to actually make paper chain, and they're doing it individually. So they're measuring a strip out, they're cutting it, and then they're taping it. And they're doing a pretty good job. Now, I'm gonna come over here and talk to my friend Jake for a second. Now, Jake, it doesn't seem as though you have very much paper chain made so far. What's going on here?
I don't know. I'm trying my hardest, and I'm still trying to get it done.
Okay, but it's not super fast, is it?
No, not very productive.
Okay. Me here, tell me a little bit. You've got more chain. What's going on over here?
I cut them into different strips, and I looped them, but much faster.
Okay, so you're just going a little bit faster than Jake over here. Okay, well, you guys are doing a pretty good job. Now, here in a little bit, we're going to come back. We're going to try something different to make this paper chain. In the meantime, there are some other historic houses here, and there's one right down the street that I want you to check out. It's the Wright Brothers family home.
Matt, I understand why the Wright Brothers Cycling Company was moved here to Greenfield Village, but this is the Wright Brothers home. Why is this here?
Well, the Wright brothers, being brothers, were never apart from each other, so the work never really stopped. They'd talk about the airplane certainly in the shop, but they'd also talk about it back home, like here in this parlor. So the house really is a part of the story.
Now, how far away was the house from the shop?
They were about 2.5, 3 blocks apart from each other in Dayton.
Now, this is Catherine Wright's desk. How is Catherine Wright important to this story?
Catherine is absolutely important to the invention of the airplane because she supported her brothers really endlessly, absolutely believed in what they were trying to do. And neither of the brothers married. They didn't have wives or children of their own. So Catherine was more than willing to handle some of their domestic chores. She did their laundry, cooking for them. So they had a little more time to worry about and concentrate on the airplane.
Now, they grew up in this house. How were their parents important? I understand their father brought them a toy at some point?
Yeah, their father was a bishop with the Anglican Church. He traveled a lot lot, always brought back a toy for them, and one of the toys he brought back was a little toy helicopter. And they played around with this a lot as boys, and that really first sparked the interest in aviation that would follow them through the rest of their lives.
And what about their mother, Susan?
Their mother was actually very mechanically inclined, so she played an important role and early influence on the boys. She actually passed away when they were both teenagers, so that was a great loss to them, and they missed her. But Wilbur always thought of her death as something that kind of brought him out of his shell. He went into a depression actually during his teenage years. He'd been in a hockey accident. Caring for his mother actually kind of brought him out that and got him on his way.
So the story starts in this house.
Absolutely.
Matt, I want to talk a little bit about the Wright family. We know about Wilbur and Orville. They invented the airplane, and we just heard about their sister Catherine. But there were more Wright children, is that correct?
Yeah, there were a couple of older brothers, Rushlin and Lauren, and they both moved out and had families of their own, but often came back to visit. But yes, Orville, Wilbur, and Catherine all lived at home with the bishop.
Now, only one of them went to college.
Yes, and Catherine was actually the only one to go to college. She went to Oberlin, graduated in 1898, and came back and actually taught high school in Dayton.
And it was unusual at the time for actually the woman of the family to have the degree.
It was, and you have to give credit to Catherine. Not only is she managing the domestic side of the Wright family with the help of a housekeeper, she's also out earning a living on her own as a teacher too. So very busy and very important to their work.
And she became sort of a celebrity in her own right, didn't she?
Yeah, Wilbur and Orville were both kind of reserved, shy fellows. Catherine did not have that problem at all, very boisterous and outgoing, and she often made the social connections for them, especially when they went over to France in 1908, and she became a celebrity in her own right over there.
Now, we are in a tiny little lab, shall we say, but here in Greenfield Village, there's another much larger lab. Do you want to tell us where we're going to go next?
Yeah, Henry Ford admired no one quite as much as Thomas Edison. So, of course, one of the first buildings he had built in Greenfield Village was a replica of Edison's original Menlo Park complex.
All right, shall we go take a look at the Menlo Park complex?
We're in a reconstruction of Thomas Edison's Menlo Park lab. Now, this looks a lot different than the Wright Brothers bike shop. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is a building actually designed by Edison to be conducive to his inventive process. So it really is what they used to call an invention factory. The world's first research and development lab, you might call it.
Now, it wasn't just Edison working here. He had a few people working with him?
He did. Edison had a whole team of folks working under his direction. Originally, it was about a dozen people, maybe 15, and then it grew to between 60 and 80 at the height of Menlo Park's productivity.
Now, there were two big inventions that came out of here. Can you tell us about those?
The two big ones were the phonograph in 1877 and then the incandescent light bulb in 1879.
And Edison didn't just invent these things to invent them. He actually did this for profit.
Yeah, Edison was an inventor by trade. He depended on the money that he would make from his inventions here to live. And a lot of that money that he made, he put right back into developing Menlo Park, growing the complex. But yes, he was absolutely dependent on patent productions and successful marketing of his inventions.
Now, one of the things that you notice when you walk in here are all of the glass jars all over the walls, and they're just filled with a variety of different things. Why is that?
Yeah, Edison had an ambition to have at least some sample of every substance known to humankind. It was a tall ambition. He didn't quite get there, but you can see by the number of jars and bottles in this building, he was serious about it. And you never knew what substance you might need to work on your various experiments. He certainly used a lot of these different things in trying to find a long-lasting light bulb filament.
Now, this chair seems to be bolted to the ground, and we're not allowed to sit in it. Why is that?
Yeah, the last person to sit in that chair was actually Thomas Edison himself. In 1929, on the 50th anniversary of his successful invention of the light bulb, they kind of recreated the moment here in this building. It was a big deal. They had a live radio broadcast. People were listening around the world. And as Edison finished the demonstration right behind me here, he actually sort of literally basked in the glow of that light bulb. And Ford was so moved. Ford, of course, being a great fan of Thomas Edison's, he said, that's it. Nail that chair to the floor. And it's been there ever since.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for showing us around.
You're welcome.
Let's compare lab size here. Now, Edison had a huge lab, and this is pretty small. Could they build the whole airplane here?
No, actually, the whole plane wouldn't fit in this building, so they'd have to build it in sections, disassemble it, then reassemble it at Kitty Hawk.
Now, when you invent something to protect it, what do you have to do?
Yeah, you want to get patent protection, and that prevents anyone else from profiting on your hard work, so it was an important thing to do.
Now, Thomas Edison had thousands?
Edison had more than 1,000 patents in his lifetime, yes.
Now, did he fill out all the paperwork and send it all out himself?
He didn't. He probably would have spent his whole life on paperwork, but he was so important in building inventions, they were so crucial to his work that he had a staff to help do that for him.
So he had someone filling out government paperwork for him.
Exactly.
Okay, what about the Wright brothers? Did they have a patent?
Much more modest. The Wrights really had one essential patent, and that's the one that covered their control system for the airplane.
And did they do that patent themselves?
Patents were a little bit beyond the Wrights' area of expertise, so they very wisely brought in an attorney to help them write that patent, and it did eventually get improved.
Okay, so do you want to go back and see what Marty's doing?
Let's.
Okay, Marty, what are you doing over at Miller School?
All right, thanks, Beth. Well, we've changed up how these guys are creating their paper chain. Now they're using more of an assembly line. So each student has something different that they're doing. So the first job up here, they're measuring the strips and they're passing them back. Henry Ford really refined the assembly line. As a matter of fact, it increased production from 8 to 1. What normally took 12 and a half hours dropped to an hour and a half. They were actually rolling Model Ts off the line at a rate of every 3 minutes. Now, you guys are doing a really nice job. Let's talk to Brianna here and tell me what's going on.
I'm cutting the papers that Ayana are drawing out for me.
Okay, do you feel like you're faster on this than maybe you were earlier?
Definitely.
Why?
Because I have to keep like picking up the pen, then putting it down, then I have to pick up the scissors, and then I have to put it down, and then I have to tape it, and it takes more time than just having everything in my hands already and doing it over again.
Awesome. Now, Adrian, do you think you're a lot faster at this?
Yeah, because then while I'm cutting, she's drawing, and he's putting them all together, so we're getting the chain done a lot faster than we were before.
Awesome. Well, let's see how they're doing here. You guys kind of blew it out of the water from the first time. You guys only had like one chain done, and now you've got a nice big chain going. Now, this is an activity that teachers can do in your classroom. We're going to post the lesson plan later on the website, and you can actually show kids how much faster and more efficient an assembly line is than just doing something on your own. Another great resource that the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum has come up with is called Engineering the Right Way. On this site, you can step into the shoes of the Wright brothers. You can design the wing shape and size, then travel to Kitty Hawk to test your glider. Some of our friends from Ball State University, who are helping us with the show today, took a crack at flying the Wright glider. Let's see how they did. Nice job, guys.
All right.
Coming in January, you will be able to design an engine, propellers, and ultimately pilot the Wright Flyer simulator. But if you're going to get your plane into the air like the Wright brothers did on December 17, 1903, you'll need more than a steady hand. You'll need to solve difficult aeronautical problems and prove your engineering solutions through rigorous testing before taking to the air at Kitty Hawk. Do you have what it takes to be an aeronautical engineer? Find out with Engineering the Right Way.
Matt, would you like to take some more questions?
I'd love to.
All right, let's start with a video question.
My name is Lucia, and my question is, the Wright brothers had a bike shop, but did they have any other businesses?
Well, that's an excellent question, Lucia. And yes, the Wright brothers did have a different business. Before they got into bicycles, they were job printers. They would print things like stationery or letterhead, posters, cards, and they built one of the printing presses themselves. So they got a lot of skill in woodworking, metalworking, and surprisingly, a lot of those skills were helpful in building the Wright Flyer, so they could take some of that experience from the print shop right into their airplane work.
I would have never thought that a print shop would have helped you build an airplane. But what about the bicycle? Did the bicycle help them build airplanes?
Yeah, the bicycle was really the key thing, I think, for the Wright brothers that they brought to the whole project. An airplane is an inherently unstable vehicle, but so is a bicycle. You get on it and you've got to make all kinds of little movements to keep those two wheels upright. We don't even think about it. It becomes second nature. A lot of people were trying to build an airplane so that it would be stable. You get up there and the pilot wouldn't have to do anything. the Wrights realized that people could handle making all of those adjustments because we can ride bikes. So they didn't worry about trying to make the plane inherently stable, just put it up as it is.
So it may be unstable, but still controllable.
Exactly right.
All right, let's take an online question. Did the Wright brothers ever test a scale model of their plane in the wind tunnel, or did they only test airfoils?
They really tested just the airfoils in the wind tunnel, though they did try scale models of their designs in the form of kites before they would actually try to fly a person up in their gliders.
How many different airfoils did they test in the wind tunnel? Do you have any idea?
Many, many, many that they went through. And yes, they kept careful notes of the exact shape and size and how much resistance and lift was generated based on that model. And really very intricate and very advanced thinking for the Wright brothers.
And they used the wind tunnel after they had the unfortunate incidents with the 1901 glide.
Exactly right. They couldn't rely on the tables that they'd been reading from books anymore, so they had to go back and study each one of these shapes to see how much lift it generated.
Okay, well, let's go back to Miller School and have a question from the Henry Ford Academy.
Hi, my name is Matthew Harris, and I wanted to know, between the two brothers, Will and Orville, who had more input in the project to build the aircraft?
That's a great question, too. Which brother was more behind the project? And I think you have to give credit to Wilbur. He's the one that first had the idea of going into the airplane business, or at least studying the problem. And he got his brother Orville involved pretty quickly. But Wilbur probably gets the lion's share of the credit for getting them started. Once they were going, it was very much a joint venture, though.
So they were really sort of a team once they started rolling with this project.
Absolutely, but Wilbur probably had the spark first.
Okay, Matt, we have time for another video question, so let's take a video question.
How long did the first airplane flight last?
All right, Elizabeth, good question. The first airplane flight was a short one, only about 12 seconds, and they covered about 120 feet, but that's all it took to change the world.
Did they get better as they tested it?
They did, actually, that day. Each flight was a little bit better, and by the last flight, they traveled 852 feet, and they were in the air for almost a minute.
Oh, wow, okay. We have another question from Miller School. Let's go back and see what they have for us.
Hello, my name is Jerome Williams, and I wondered, did the Wright brothers have a mentor or someone they looked up to for inspiration?
That's a terrific question, and they did have a mentor. Well, their father was a mentor for one thing. He kind of inspired them by way of his example and the way that he lived his life. But in terms of aviation, Octave Chanute was an important influence for the Wright brothers. They developed a very friendly correspondence with him. He came out and visited them in Dayton and at Kitty Hawk and helped them along the way, gave them a lot of encouragement.
Now, was he doing aeronautic testing at the same time?
He was doing some of his own testing. He was quite a bit older than the Wrights, so he wouldn't actually fly in the planes himself. He just felt that was too risky for someone of his age. But he was involved in a lot of the design work, and he gave some pointers to the Wright brothers and also got Wilbur an invitation to speak before some engineers in the city of Chicago, which kind of boosted their reputation.
So there were a lot of people helping them along the way.
They were. So we think about them, two people kind of working alone in their shop, but it's more than that. I mean, they had their family, their sister Catherine, they had people like Chanute, and they had all sorts of folks who were at least involved in some form in bringing the airplane to fruition.
Let's take an online question. Why did they pick cloth instead of any other material for the wings, I take it?
Well, that's a nice question. You know, today we think about nylon, carbon fiber. You know, those things didn't exist at the time the Wright brothers were working. So they chose muslin instead, which is a fairly lightweight but durable cloth that served their purpose as well.
Was it a common cloth that they found, or did they have to special order it?
It was pretty easy to find, but you know, it was a little rare out in Kitty Hawk, and there's some great stories about the people who lived there just being surprised that they were wasting this beautiful fabric on this airplane contraption.
Well, fortunately, they picked that contraption up and brought it back.
Yes.
What about, now they did gliders. Did they bring the gliders back?
They would generally just abandon their airplanes and their gliders at Kitty Hawk. They'd be done, get their records, their documentation for the year, and say, that's it, let's go back home. Of course, the Wright Flyer from 1903 was a little different. They realized the historic significance in that craft.
Okay. Let's take another question from Miller's School.
I'm Robin, and I was wondering, why did the Wright brothers choose to test in the fall and winter instead of in the summer when it's nice and sunny?
That's a good question because it is cold and just before Christmas here. So
yeah,
we're traveling. So why did they do that?
That is an excellent question. And I think the main answer to that is because of where we are right now. They were bicycle builders. And of course, bicycling is a seasonal business. People start buying bikes in the spring. They're riding them all summer and into the fall. So that was their busy time of year. By fall, things started to slow down, and then they could afford to get away from the shop to go out to Kitty Hawk.
Okay. Thank you for telling us this little bit of the story. We're out of time today. We want to make sure that you join us next month when we talk about the Lindberghs. So check this out.
Hi, I'm Marty Kelsey, one of the hosts of STEM in 30, and check this out. This is a periscope on the Spirit of St. Louis. There's no front windshield. The only way that Charles Lindbergh could look forward on his flight from New York to Paris was to look through this periscope. That's phenomenal. If you think this is interesting, be sure to tune in to STEM in 30.
Matt, thank you so much for being here today. And I want to thank the Henry Ford for hosting us. I also want to thank Ball State University, who did a great job actually bringing you this show. They've been terrific today. And I want to thank our sponsor, Alcoa. We couldn't do it without you guys. And I also want to thank the Henry Ford Academy. They graciously got out of class to help us with our assembly line program. Thank you all. We hope to see you next month. So there's a motor.